Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Dear student teachers, I am Rashid Salim with lecture 17 of Functional English 1. In lecture number 17, we are going to learn how to ask and respond to questions. And I think nobody knows better than the teachers that asking questions is very important in our life. It is probably a crucial function for learning, for checking students' learning. So this is an important skill, and today we will learn how to form questions in English and how to ask questions and how to respond to them. But before we move on with today's lecture, let's have a quick recap of what we learned earlier. In lecture number 16, we learned how to talk about future plans and how to talk about our intentions. In fact, we also looked at decisions. Then we learned how to use present simple and present continuous tenses. And although you know how to use these tenses, but we learned in lecture number 16 how to use these two tenses for talking about future. Yes, present simple and present continuous tense for future. We also learned how to use future simple tense and the expression be going to for talking about future plans. And in the end, you were also guided to write a short itinerary, a short travel itinerary. So this is what we learned in lecture number 16. We talked about future and we learned various expressions that will help us talk about future. Now we move on to today's lecture, lecture number 17. The objectives of lecture number 17 are that after completing this lecture, you should be able to identify various types of questions in English. You should be able to form appropriate questions. And you should also be able to use appropriate intonation patterns in order to make your questions more effective. Now there are different ways to go about it, but I have tried to make it simple and start with identifying the types of questions. Once you have identified it, it will be easier for you to form different kinds of questions. And in the end, we'll also look at various intonation patterns. Since this lecture is about asking questions, so let me start by asking questions. Okay, are you a teacher? You are a teacher, aren't you? Yeah, I can hear that all of you probably say yes to it because you are all teachers. Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions and I want you to think about their answers. Do you teach maths? I can hear few of you saying yes, but majority of you are nodding your heads or saying no. Have you ever received Best Teacher Award? If you did, congratulations. Which textbooks do you teach from? How do you assess your students' learning progress? How often do you arrange class tests? And the next question is really interesting. How many questions do you ask in a day? So maybe in future, try to count the number of questions that you ask in a day. Of course, I don't want you to be 100% precise. That would be terrible. But you can have a rough idea about the number of questions that you ask in a day? Well, according to a research, majority of the teachers, they use 300 to 400 questions a day. It sounds like an exaggeration because this is too much, isn't it? Okay, why did you decide to enroll in ADE, which is Associate Degree in Education? Why did you decide to enroll in Associate Degree in Education? Now, this is an open-ended question, and you might have different answers to it. The final question is, how will AID or ADE help you in your teaching career? Before I proceed any further, look at this last word. It is career, not carrier, as some people mispronounce it. Carrier is something that carries, like you have a carrier at the back of your bicycle or a motorbike. That is called a carrier because it carries things from one place to another place, right? Or you have a missile carrier. Missile carrier is a device that carries a missile from one place to another place. Or a weapon carrier. Weapon carrier is a vehicle that carries weapons from one place to another place, and armies quite often use weapons carriers. But here we are not talking about carriers, we are talking about career. So your professional career, your teaching career, right? Okay, I come back to the question. How will ADE help you in your teaching career? Okay, now because it is a video lecture and it has certain limitations, I won't be able to get your answers right now, but I would appreciate if you think about these questions and try to answer them realistically. Okay, but my purpose here is to make you look at these questions and find out how these questions are formed, what kind of questions these are. If you look at the first question, you are a teacher, aren't you? How did you answer to this question? By saying, yes, I am, or no, I am not. And majority of you probably said, yes, I am. So this is one kind of question in which you can answer either by saying yes or by saying no. And you guessed it right. This type of question is called yes-no question. How about, do you teach maths? That's right. You guessed it right. It's the same kind of question because you can answer it either with a yes or with a no. How about the next question? Have you ever received Best Teacher Award? Yes, again, you can answer it with a yes or no. Look at the next question. Which textbook or textbooks do you teach from? Can you answer it with a yes or no? Of course not. This time you will have to give the list of textbooks that you are teaching from. So this requires a longer answer. In fact, this is asking for a piece of information. How do you assess your students' learning progress? So what kind of information I am asking this time? The method, the way you teach something. Okay? And how often do you arrange class tests? I want to know the frequency of this action. How many questions do you ask in a day? Again, I am seeking for a particular kind of information. So you would see that I can ask various kinds of questions for various purposes. So the art of asking question actually is to learn what kind of questions are available in English and what is the purpose of asking this question. Once you know why you want to ask a question and what kind of questions you can ask, it will be much easier for you to ask effective questions. In fact, very often we ask our students to give the right answers, but it's quite a difficult task to ask the right questions. How many times you asked a question from the students and you got a different answer, not because they were wrong, but because you were unable to pose an appropriate question? Well, it happens, very often it happens with me, that I phrase a question and I have an answer in my mind, but later on I find out that the question that I phrased was not the best one. So maybe I should revisit that question and I should change it. Okay, so these were some questions. Let's move on. Let's look at the question types first. Okay, the first type we've already talked about. It's called yes-no questions. The second type is WH questions. The third type of questions can be embedded questions. And the fourth one, which is really an interesting and maybe something new for you, is tag question. Well, this is not an exhaustive list. I mean, these are not the only question types. There can be various question types in various contexts. But in order to get the basic idea of questions, if you just look at these 4 question types, it will be a good beginning. It will be a good start. Okay, we start by looking at all these kinds one by one. Okay, so the first type of questions are yes-no questions. And we've already learned that these questions may be answered with a yes or no. I'm using the word maybe because you can't be 100% sure that this will be answered with a yes or no. There are certain situations in which the listener would like to answer with a different phrase, not necessarily with yes or no. But it may be answered with yes or no. Or normally with these questions we are expecting to get an answer of either yes or no. Okay, here are some questions. Can you swim? Okay. And while you are looking at yes-no questions, I would also like you to look at the way these are framed. Okay. If you make a declarative sentence, if you make a positive statement, you will say, you can swim. If you want to ask a question, the moral verb can will come to the beginning of the sentence. The structure of the sentence will be inverted. So instead of saying you can swim, you are now starting your sentence with a moral verb. Can you swim? Okay. So this is true for all the moral verbs. You can say, may I come in? Should I come early? Will you sit down here? Okay, so all these, would you like some coffee? Okay, so all these moral verbs, would, may, will, can, could, might, should. What you need to do is simply you bring it to the front. You start your sentence with the moral verb if you are asking a question. Okay, the next question is he a mechanic? Again, you see, He is a mechanic is the statement, and what are you doing? You are bringing the helping verb is to the beginning of the sentence. So just like moral verbs, you can bring auxiliary or helping verbs to the beginning of a sentence in order to make a question. The commonest helping verbs are be and have. So all forms of be. For example, is, are, am. Is, are, am, and even was, were. These are various forms of the verb be. And there are two forms of have. You have has and have. Okay. So if you have a moral verb in your sentence, you can bring it to the front to pose a question. If you have a helping verb in your statement, you can start your sentence with that helping verb. Is, are, am, was, were, has, or have. So you can say, have you got the key? Is he sleeping right now? Is he a mechanic? Okay. Now look at the remaining questions. Do you live in Sialkot? Now, if your sentence does not have a helping verb in it, like you live in Sialkot, here you don't have the helping verb, you only have the main verb live. In that case, you can use one of the forms of do. If it is present simple tense, you can say, do you live in Sialkot? If it is past simple tense, you can say, did you live in Sialkot? If it is present perfect tense, you can say, with present perfect tense, you have a helping verb in it, have, so you will start it with, have you lived in Sialkot? But for past simple and present simple, you don't have any helping verb in the sentence. So instead of starting your sentence with a helping verb, you start it with do. So these yes-no questions usually start with be, have, do, or moral verbs. Okay. All right, we'll learn more about yes-no questions, but let's move ahead first and look at other kinds of questions. No, sorry, before we move on to the other kinds of questions, let's have an exercise. Or even before the exercise, there are two kinds of yes-no questions. There are further sub-kinds of yes-no questions. We call them positive yes-no questions and negative yes-no questions. Positive yes-no questions are like, are you coming? And negative yes-no questions start with the negative form of the helping verb, the moral verb, or do. Like, aren't you coming? Similarly, positive yes-no question is, have you met him before? Negative yes-no question could be, haven't you met him before? And you might notice that you don't say, are you not coming? Instead, you say, aren't you coming? Haven't you met him before? Aren't you ashamed of what you did? So usually we use the shortened form of not when we make a negative yes-no question. So instead of saying, are you not coming, it will be more natural to say, aren't you coming? Haven't you met him before? Aren't you ashamed of what you did? So if you are asking a question and it is a yes-no question and it is negative, you should use the short form of not. Instead of saying not, you say aren't, isn't, hasn't, haven't, etc., etc., or shouldn't, couldn't. All right. Okay. So we move on and we see why and when do we ask positive yes no questions and when do we ask negative yes no questions. This is really important because learning the form is not enough. This is functional English course, so we must learn the function of these forms. If you look at the bottom of this screen here, positive yes no questions do not imply any expectation regarding whether the answer will be yes or no. In simple English, it means that when you ask a positive yes no question, you don't expect a yes or no as an answer. You do not have any assumption, you do not have any expectation. Whereas when you use negative yes no question, you are generally asking this question to confirm an assumption or an expectation. Okay? For example, if I say, haven't you met him before? My assumption is that you have met him before. I am merely asking this question to confirm whether I am right in assuming that you've met him before. And if I say, aren't you ashamed of what you did? This means that I expect you to be ashamed of what you did. Right? So this could be really very, you can say, sarcastic, जिसको उर्दू में हम तंजिया कहते हैं. Aren't you ashamed of what you did? This also shows my annoyance. I am annoyed. So if I am annoyed with someone, I can say, aren't you ashamed of what you did? So it shows my annoyance. In other words, these negative yes no questions can show my assumptions, my expectations, my feeling of annoyance, etc. Okay, now it's time to do a little bit of exercise. So let's move on. Okay, in this exercise you are going to indicate what expectation or assumption do these questions imply. Imply means that these questions do not directly ask these assumptions and expectations, but there are underlying expectations and assumptions, and you must understand them. Otherwise, your English proficiency is in doubt. So once you understand the functions of these questions, what is the underlying expectation or assumption behind these questions, only then you can say that you know really what these questions mean. Okay, let's look at the first question. Aren't you a plumber? So what is the underlying expectation or assumption behind this question? If I ask, aren't you a plumber? I expected you to be a plumber. So if you did something that is not appropriate for a plumber to do, or if you did something wrong, or if you said that you don't know how to fix this tap, water tap, I can say, aren't you a plumber? This means I expected you to be a plumber. So the negative form of this question indicates that I expected you to be a plumber. Can't you wait a little? What is the underlying expectation here? Can't you wait a little? Very often we ask our students, can't you wait a little? Yes, I assume that you are getting a little impatient. So when we think that someone is getting impatient, indirectly we can say, can't you wait a little? This shows a little bit of my annoyance also, that I am annoyed. I expect you to wait, but probably you are not cooperating. Probably you are getting impatient. Okay, how about the next question? Weren't you informed? This means I expected you were informed. Didn't I warn you before? This means I am annoyed because you didn't listen to me. So this is like complaining. If I say, didn't I warn you before? I am complaining that you didn't listen to me, and I am expressing my feeling of annoyance. Won't you help him? This question underlies the assumption that I am sure you will help him. I expect you to help him. I think you will definitely help him. Okay, so this is really important that you understand the underlying feeling or the underlying assumptions or expectations behind these negative yes-no questions, because otherwise you can't really say that you understand these questions. Okay, now we move on to the second type of question, and the second type of questions are WH questions. WH questions are those questions that start with a question word and require a longer answer, require some piece of information. And you can't answer a WH question with a yes or no. For example, when will the match start? You can't answer it with a yes or no. I'm asking about the time. When will the match start? How far is your house from your school? I'm looking for a piece of information. Which color is your favorite? I'm expecting you to tell me the name or the color. Okay, so these are WH questions, and although we call them WH, but in fact some question words do not really start with WH. We look at them. Here is a list of some question words that can be used in order to ask questions, WH questions. So if you want to know about things or a thing, you start your question with the question word what. So you say, what is this? What are you saying? What's your name? Okay. So whenever I want to know about things, I will start my question with the question word what. Who, whose, and whom, these question words are used when we want to know about a person. For time and date, we use when. For place, in order to know about place, we ask our question with where. In order to get know the reason of an action, we ask a question with why. For choice or option, we ask a question with which. How something is done, if I want to know the method or the way, I'll ask the question with how. And how is one question that doesn't start with WH, but it is a WH question word nonetheless. Okay, with how we can also use other adjectives to form, to make other question words. So we can ask how far, how often, how long, how many, how much, how tall, etc., etc. How far, the question word how far is used when we want to know about the distance. How far is your house from your school? How often is in order to ask the frequency. How long when you want to know about the duration. How many is used when you want to know about the number of things or the number of persons. How much is used for the quantity. For example, how much sugar would you take? How much time do you have? And how much is also used for asking about the price of things. Like, how much is this pen? How tall can be used for asking about height. Now here I would like to mention that the natural way of asking these questions is to use a question word. Normally what we do is that instead of using these question words on the left, we use the same words on the right. So instead of asking how long will the meeting take, we ask question, what's the duration of the meeting, which is not a very natural way of asking. So instead of asking what is the frequency of smoking, what's your frequency of smoking, that is very unnatural, ridiculous question, I would rather say. Instead you should say, how often do you smoke? Okay, and instead of asking what's the distance between your school and your house, that is too formal a question. Instead you should ask, how far is your house from your school? Okay, so it is a good practice not to use these words, and instead think which question word is appropriate for asking this piece of information, this kind of information, and then use it. Okay, sometimes we use question words and our question ends with a preposition. It's very common in English. And most of the times the three question words, who, which, and what, they often take a preposition. Usually a sentence ends with a preposition if it starts with who, which, or what. For example, who does this book belong to? Another way of asking this question could be, to whom does this book belong? But this is too formal, and nowadays hardly anyone, almost nobody speaks it like this. So the best way is to ask question like this, especially in oral form. In written form you can still say to whom, but in speech it is appropriate to say, who does this book belong to? What are you looking for? Which university did you go to? What country do you come from? Now, what preposition to use at the end of these sentences actually depends on what piece of information you require. With belong, we usually say to, belongs to. For look, we use looking for. Okay, go to and come from. So if you just look at these verbs here, it will be clear what preposition usually goes with these verbs. Special question words. So far we have looked at question words, and two of these question words, I call them special question words. They are who and what. And why do I call them special question words? Because they need special treatment. Because it's tricky to form questions with these two words. With all the other question words, usually the format is the same. We say, what is your name? So is your name is the inverted sentence, and what we need is just put the question word before it. In other words, just before yes no question, we use the same format as yes no question. We just place the question word before it. So we say, why are you late? Yes no question would be, are you late? And if I want to make a WH question, I can add WH question word before it. So I can say, why are you late? Or instead of saying, are you coming, I can say, when are you coming? Okay. Instead of saying, will you go, I can say, when will you go? So we can use a question word before the yes no format of a question. Simple as that. But be careful when we are making question with who or what, because who is used for a person, and if we want to know about a person who is the subject of this sentence, then we don't invert the sentence. For example, we say, who invented radio? We know Marconi invented radio. So the sentence would be, Marconi invented radio. I'm not really sure if it was Marconi who invented radio, or maybe it was Graham Bell. No, Graham Bell, I think, invented telephone. So, who here replaces the subject. If we want to get the information about the subject of a sentence, we will not invert the sentence. So, we'll say, who invented radio? We will not say, who did invent radio. That will be incorrect. Whenever we want to know about the subject, we will not invert the sentence form. So we say, who invented radio? Who discovered America? Who stood first? So I want to know the subject of this action. Who performed the action of discovering America? Who performed the action of standing first? Since I want to know about the subject of these actions, therefore I will not use the inverted form of the sentence. I would just say, who discovered America? Who stood first? Who found you this morning, etc. Who told you? Okay. All right. Another form of who can be used, and that is whose. And it is used when we want to know about the possession. Whose does something belongs to. So one way to ask this question is, who does this pen belong to? But a better way of asking it is, whose pen is it? Okay. And you will see that for possession, we use the inverted form. We don't say it is, we say is it. We use the inverted form here. Whose house are you looking for? Not you are looking for. Are you looking for? So we use the inverted form for possession. We use the inverted form for object. But we don't use the inverted form when who is used to inquire about the subject. Okay. Okay, you can say whose bags is this, or you can say whose is this bag. These are two ways of asking the same question. Okay, if we want to know about the object of an action, we use whom. Whom did you call? Okay. Remember, if Ali called Asim, whom did Ali call? Asim. And if I say who called Asim, the answer will be Ali. Okay. I repeat, Ali called Asim. Who called Asim? And who did Ali call? You got my point? So if we want to know about the object of an action, we invert the sentence, or we use the inverted form. And if we want to know about the subject, we don't use the inverted form. We would simply say who phoned or who called you. Another way is to use who instead of whom. So you can say, who did you talk to? Who are you talking about? Okay. And it is very common to use this who and preposition instead of whom in informal speech. Okay, the same thing is true about the question word what. What is the word what is used to inquire about things. And if you want to know about the things that are the subject of something, we won't use the inverted form. So we'll say what went wrong. We will not say what did go wrong. We will say what went wrong. What happened afterwards? What made you angry? We want to know the subject of these actions. So you can replace what with the answer. You can say something went wrong, something happened afterwards, something made you angry. So we want to know about that something, and therefore we are using inverted. We are not using an inverted form. Instead, we are using a simple form of a sentence. I hope this is clear. Whereas when we want to know about the object of an action, we will invert it. We'll say, did you say? What did you say? This time we won't say, what said you, or what you said. Repeat करते हैं. This time we won't say what you said or what said you. This will be incorrect. The correct question would be, what did you say? What have you done? Okay. So these are special question words. With who, we can form questions in two ways. If we want to know about the subject, we do not invert the sentence. If we want to know about the object, we invert the sentence. Similarly, if we want to know about the subject, what, we do not invert the sentence. If we want to know about the object, what, we invert the sentence. Okay, so let's move on to the exercise. In this exercise, you are going to ask an appropriate question to get the missing information. Now, very often you ask questions and you expect your students to give the answers. I have turned it upside down. I want you to form questions for these answers. The answers are already there. I have crossed them out. So this strike through means that this information is missing. You can imagine that you heard this sentence, Ahmed bought a camera yesterday, and the phrase a camera was not very audible. You couldn't hear it properly. So you want to ask a question in order to find the answer, in order to know the missing information. So Ahmed bought a camera yesterday. If the phrase a camera is misprinted or you couldn't hear it properly, how would you get this answer? By asking a question. So what would your question be? Yes, you are right. What did Ahmed buy yesterday? So if you ask this question, what did Ahmed buy yesterday, you will get the answer, a camera. That is the missing information, a camera. So this should serve as an example for you, and now I think you can do the rest of the sentences on your own. Fatima lives in Karachi. What should be your question word? That's right, because Karachi is a place, you want to know about a place, so your question word should be where. Okay, and the question would probably be, where does Fatima live? Farhan needed the money to pay his fee, and if this information is missing, to pay his fee, what would be your question word this time? You want to know the reason why Farhan needed the money, and for reasons we start our question with why. That's right. So why did Farhan need the money? The book cost him 300 rupees. 300 rupees is the price, and what question word is required for asking about the price? You are right, how much. So how much did the book cost, or how much did the book cost him? Both are correct. I'm looking for a car that is fuel efficient. So the question could be, which car are you looking for? it's a choice or it's an option. What kind of car? You can also say, what kind of car are you looking for? He visits his parents every month. We want to know about the frequency of his visits. So the question will start with how often. How often does he visit his parents? I came here on foot. The question would be, how did you come here? On foot, by car, by motorcycle, by bicycle, etc., etc. It takes an hour to get there. So we want to know about the duration. So the question will be, how long does it take to get there? How long does it take to get there? Okay, very good. You have completed exercise number 2. Okay, now we move on to embedded questions, another kind of question. Embedded questions are questions that appear in a declarative statement or in another question. For example, do you know where he lives? In this question, do you know is the direct question, whereas where he lives is asked indirectly. This kind of question is called embedded question. So where he lives is embedded question. Can you tell me why you misbehaved? So why you misbehaved is an embedded question. And here you should also look at the form. Instead of saying where does he live, I am saying where he lives, because it is not really a question. There is a question mark at the end, but this question mark is for this question, do you know? Where he lives is the embedded question. So whenever you have embedded question, you do not invert the sentence. And you do not have a question mark unless there is a direct question. Okay? So can you tell me is the direct question, so you have a question mark. But here you don't have the question mark because I wonder is not a question. I wonder why you come late. I wonder why you always come late, or I wonder why you come late. So why you come late is the embedded question, and I wonder is my expression of surprise. It's not a question, so I'm not going to use a question mark at the end. So similarly, you can look at the remaining questions. The question is how often we should assess our students' progress. How often we should assess our students' progress is the embedded question. And again, you see, we do not use the inverted form in embedded questions. So there are two rules that you should remember here. In embedded questions, we do not use the inverted form, and in after embedded questions, we do not use a question mark unless there is a direct question before the embedded question. Who will tell me where our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born? Okay, not where was our Prophet born. There are two ways of asking this question in the class. Either you can ask it with a direct question. In that case, you will say, where was our Prophet born? Where was our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam born? This will be the direct question. And if you want to know the indirect question, you will say, who will tell me, or who knows where our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born? Okay. In that case, you will not use the inverted form. You will not say where was. Instead, you will say where our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born. Okay. This is important. Very often teachers commit mistakes when they are using questions in embedded form. Does anyone know how plants grow? Science teachers often ask this question. Tell me what time it is, right? Not what is the time, what time it is. Not how do plants grow, but how plants grow. Can you explain how clouds are formed? Not how are clouds formed, but how clouds are formed. We don't use the inverted form because it is embedded question. So I hope this is clear. This is very useful, asking embedded questions in our classes. Very often we ask embedded questions. Okay, now we move on to the last type of question that we will discuss today. It is called tag questions. And you know what tag means? As you have a name tag, sometimes that is displayed on the code. It identifies you. You also have price tag. Price tag is usually attached to the garments or to other products. Okay, so tag is like a short note. So what do we mean by tag questions? Tag questions consist of a tag, which is a short question form, attached to a stem, which is a statement. Okay, maybe the definition is difficult, so let's have a look at the examples. You are going, aren't you? They have won, haven't they? So in bold type here you have the tag, and you are going is the stem. It is a statement, you are going, and aren't you is the tag which is attached to this stem. So this is a tag question. You are going, aren't you? They have won, haven't they? He is not an electrician, is he? You can drive, can't you? They didn't inform, did they? Okay, here you will notice one thing. Look at the stem and the tag. Both in the stem and the tag, the subject is the same, you. The helping verb is the same, are. The tense is the same. Okay, but you see here we have are and here you have aren't. So this is positive and here you have negative. Now can you look at these questions and tell me the rule? How do we form tag questions? Yes, you are right. If the statement is positive, the tag is negative. If the statement is negative, like he is not an electrician, the tag is positive. Okay, I repeat, if the statement is positive, the tag is negative. If the statement is negative, the tag is positive. So the tag is going to be the opposite of the statement. Okay, otherwise the subject, you, they, it remains the same. The verb, the helping verb remains the same. Okay, but if you just look at the last question, hurry up, will you? This is positive and this is also positive. This is another kind of tag question. So there are two kinds of tag questions and I would like to go through them now. Okay, there are two types of tag questions here. One is called the opposite polarity tag questions and second is same polarity tag questions. Okay. Maybe the names are slightly difficult. So if you just look at the examples, they are pretty easy. He is a doctor, isn't he? They are not willing, are they? As we learned earlier, that if the statement is positive, the tag question is negative. And if the statement is negative, the tag question is positive. So this is called opposite polarity tag question. Whereas if the statement as well as the tag both are positive, we call them same polarity tag questions. Like, so that's your masterpiece, is it? Be quiet, will you? It's your test today, remember? Let's start working, shall we? So here you see that we have a tag question at the end of all these sentences, but they have different functions here. First thing here is that both the statement as well as the tag are positive. And here, be quiet, will you? We don't use the same helping verb. And here, it's your test today, remember. Remember is not even a helping verb. So sometimes we can use a verb which is very different. Now we'll see what are the functions of these same polarity tag questions. Same polarity tag questions actually can have various functions. I want you to do this exercise number 3 and see if you can find their functions. Question number 1. Ali is invited, isn't he? So what do you think is the function of this question tag here? Yes, you are right. It's asking for information. How about, it's Friday today, isn't it? The underlying function is a reminder. The speaker wants to remind you that it's Friday. Although he is confirming, but it could also be a reminder. You don't believe me, do you? Yes, it's a confirmation. Turn on the TV, will you? It's an urgent imperative. Imperative is like an order. We have learnt imperatives earlier. But if we want to make an urgent imperative, we can add a tag question to it. So turn on the TV, will you? And here usually we use the form will. Let's talk about that over dinner, shall we? The function is that it is a polite suggestion. Okay. Let's talk about that over dinner is a suggestion, and shall we makes it polite. So you think you are some kind of genius, do you? Now this is really interesting because here do you expresses sarcasm, and sarcasm is what you call tanz in Urdu, and native speakers very often use this kind of tag question in order to be sarcastic. Okay, so you understand what I mean, right? Very often we use this tag in our classes. Right here is used for checking whether you are following me or not, or it is to get feedback. Okay, now for asking questions, it is really important that we use the appropriate intonation pattern. And by intonation we mean the rise and fall of our pitch, the rise and fall of our way of speaking. When we ask yes-no questions, usually our tone rises. So we say, are you hungry? Are you tired? So the last word is emphasized and it is spoken with a rising tone. Whereas for WH questions, we have a falling tone. So we say, what are you doing? Where are you from? So you see, we start with a high pitched sound and we end it with a low note. But how about tag questions? For tag questions, we can use various tones. If we are using tag questions just to chat, then we use falling tone. If we want to check the information to confirm, then we use the rising tone. For example, we say, sit down, will you? So will you will be said with the rising tone. Now look at these statements here. You live here is a statement. It is not really a question, but you can make it a question by asking it in rising tone. So you can say, you live here, you are a doctor, you need my help. So you can turn these statements into a question by using a rising tone. So in speech, be careful and don't turn your statements into questions if you don't want to. Make sure that you are using the appropriate intonation pattern. Okay, so what we learned in today's lecture, I want you to practice it at home, and for that I want you to download the handout that is provided with this lecture, and this is what you are supposed to do. You will find a partner, and with your partner you will work in pairs. You will suppose that you are a news reporter and your partner is a celebrity. A celebrity is some popular figure, like a sports figure, or maybe a musician, or an actor, or a famous politician. So suppose you are a news reporter and your partner is a celebrity. You are going to interview this celebrity, and for that first you will make a list of 10 questions. You will write it down on a piece of paper, and finally you will ask these questions in the form of an interview. Once you are over with this activity, you will swap your roles. That means now you will become the celebrity and the celebrity would become the news reporter, and you would repeat this dialogue. So if you really want to practice these question forms that we have learned today, you must practice it. So don't skip it. With this we come to the end of lecture number 17. Here is the summary again. In lecture number 17 we learned how to identify different types of questions. We learned to form appropriate questions, and we also learned how to use appropriate intonation patterns. So I hope that today's lecture would be really very beneficial, and it will help you asking and responding to questions in your own class and in your life. Thank you very much.